This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello everybody and welcome. My name's John Bleasdale. I'm a writer and film critic, and today I'm going to be talking to Anna Cale, who is the author of a biography on the actress Diana Dors, the Real Diana Dors it's called. Diana Dors shot to fame in the 50s and 60s and had a long career as a film actress, mainly in British cinema. Anna's book is great at revealing this side of Diana Dors because later in life she became much more of a sort of tabloid hounded celebrity, and she became sort of a game show guest and that sort of thing. So she was very famous, I remember, when I was growing up, but she's sort of a little bit disappeared from view. So Anna's book is a really good corrective in showing us what the original talent was, and in some ways it's a sad book because it also shows the decline of the British film industry. Well, you know, that's what happens. If you enjoyed the episode, please remember to like and review and tweet about it. You can follow me on Twitter at drjonty, DRJONTY. But before you do any of that, please enjoy the conversation. I was really interested in your book because Diana Dors is one of those people who, when I grew up, I'm a kid of the 70s, 80s. She was kind of omnipresent. She was a really big figure in British culture, but she's sort of, I'm not even sure. Is she still that sort of? Is she still remembered in that way, or how? Where does she stand now, do you think?
I think you're right. I think people of different generations have different memories of her. So I'm a similar age to you, I guess, from what you've said. And yeah, I mean, that's how I first encountered her, was as a child watching TV. You know, she'd be a guest on a sofa on a chat show, or she'd be on a game show, or she'd just be this larger than life character suddenly appearing on the screen looking radiant and wonderful. And as a child, she entranced me, you know, and that's how I got to know her. But, you know, through that, not through her acting necessarily at that stage. It was only later on, you know, that I kind of saw her screen career, you know, before that time, before the late 70s, early 80s, when she was this kind of mainstay of British TV, you know, culture. And yeah, I think a lot of people of my generation certainly accessed her that way, or they saw the Prince Charming video, the Adamant video, and saw her on that, or they saw her.
Oh my God, she was on that as well.
On TV. She was the fairy godmother.
Oh yeah. Oh man,
looking amazing.
That's an absolute flashback there.
Having a right laugh, you know, kind of doing that kind of thing. And she always looked like she was absolutely enjoying every moment of what she did. And I think that really came across in the way she kind of captured people's kind of imaginations, really, and people loved her for it, you know. But people obviously older, you know, remember her from the peak of her screen career. I think one of the reasons I wanted to write the book was to kind of get people to recognise her as a film actor, as a star, and try and get them to kind of revisit her career, look beyond the tabloid headlines and all the other stuff that kind of came along with her, and just see her as an actor and a really fascinating person. And try and get people's interest in her. You know, I talk to kind of younger film writers, particularly female writers, who don't know of her or, you know, aren't really very familiar with her work. And I'm like, yeah, you need to look into her. You know, you need to look at her career because it's a fascinating one, which hopefully came across in the book, that combination of there's the acting, but there was the fame and the kind of the way that she presented herself is all part of that image. And I think it's a really interesting study of, you know, British film culture at the time and stardom, and you know, she's a really interesting person to study from that point of view as well.
The appeal of the book for me was initially sort of like this nostalgic sort of like, I wonder, I have this person in my head. I'd like to know more about her. I'd like to know what was behind this. But then as I was reading, it was really, right, there are some films here that I've seen and I remember her in, and there are some films here I've never heard of that I need to put on my watch list. And it was, yeah, no, it really, I think the book really worked as an appreciation. And it certainly made me want to go back and look at some of those older, movies when she was starting out. What was the first film then that you were watching and you first discovered her as an actress rather than as a sort of TV personality?
Yeah, so it was way after that, to be honest. It was a long time after when I started studying film, kind of in earnest, and British film. And it was Yield to the Night was, the first film I saw her in, or really noticed her in, but purposely sought out to watch.
Right.
I really liked the films of J. Lee Thompson, who's the director. She worked with him a few times, and Yield to the Night is an amazing film. It's an amazing piece of work. It's a really important piece of cinema, but it's also a really amazing performance by Diana Dors. And it was a performance that should have been the start of something amazing for her and wasn't. And I think that's a really interesting kind of part of her career journey as well, is that she should have become the star that she deserved to be and felt she deserved to be, but didn't. And it's a really interesting kind of turning point in her career. But as a film, it's an amazing film. As a performance, it's amazing. And I think, whenever anyone asks me, what films would I recommend, obviously that's top of the list. It's an amazing performance. It's not my favourite of her films, I don't think. I have a real soft spot for some of her other work in the 50s, the kind of the gritty British Northern noir kind of stuff that she did, like Tread Softly Stranger is an example, where she's this amazing, beautiful woman suddenly appearing in these kind of dodgy bedsits and kind of, industrial landscapes. And The Long Haul is another example of that, where, she's kind of this gorgeous vision appearing in this kind of film about, kind of trade routes between Glasgow and Liverpool. Just really random subjects and random films. It sounds crazy, but it's a period of British cinema that I think a lot of people aren't familiar with. But she is absolutely she just lights up the screen, and she's gorgeous, but her performances really lift the films. She just gives she has this amazing screen presence, and I think that really comes across in those films of that period. So yeah, my interest grew in her as I started to watch her on screen. It was fascinating to watch her.
Could you tell us a bit more about Yield to the Night then? Describe the film for us.
Okay, so Yield to the Night is a rallying cry, really, for changes to the law on the death penalty. So J. Lee Thompson, he made the film, as a way of kind of, I guess, capturing people's imaginations with a story, but actually, would get people to think differently about how the death penalty was used. Yeah, he used kind of the film as a way to kind of do that and kind of create a conversation around it.
And she plays someone who's accused of a crime, who's guilty.
Yeah, so this is the interesting thing. We know from the start of the film that she's guilty. What we see is, so she's awaiting the death penalty. She's in solitary confinement, awaiting the news about her appeal against her sentence. We see her recounting how she got there. So through the film, the story builds about her and her former boyfriend and a woman who her boyfriend was involved with, and how she came to be found guilty of murder. And it's really interesting. We're not trying to establish her guilt, but we're looking at her as a person and the motivations, I guess, and the story around how people can come into those situations. There's no judgment there in that sense of, we know she's guilty, we know that she killed someone, but what J. Lee Thompson does is he tries to kind of create this conversation around, well, what would you do in that situation? What would you have done, differently? And it's kind of, it's a kind of fascinating way to kind of build that picture of someone. Nobody's kind of whiter than white. It's just really interesting the way Diana Dors plays the character as well. How she kind of, it's a real kind. She looks very different, obviously, to previous roles. Her hair is kind of scraped back. She's got no makeup on, and we're seeing this kind of unraveling of her as a character as she recounts her story and is facing her fate, and kind of recounting this to the women guards in the prison. It's kind of, it's a beautifully made film. The way that he makes the film is really stark and wonderful. And the flashbacks kind of create that kind of colour within that story. It's a wonderful contrast with obviously the prison scenes. It's a really fascinating piece of filmmaking with a wonderful central performance. It did start the conversation. People often mistake the character that Diana Dors plays is Mary Hilton, and people often mistake her as playing Ruth Ellis, who was a real life, person who was the last woman to be hung in this country.
And Miranda Richardson played her later on in, was it Dance with a Stranger?
Dance with a Stranger, yeah, which is a wonderful film too. People often kind of get the two things confused, but it's not Ruth Ellis's story, and actually this was a fictionalised account. It came out before that case. It was based on a book, which kind of so I'm just having a trying to think back. Yeah, it's based on a book, and the book it's a fictionalised account of what might happen rather than a factual case. But there are so many similarities with the Ruth Ellis case. It's you can see why people do confuse the two cases because they are so similar.
Sort of like her most un-Diana Dorsy performance, isn't it? Would that be fair to say?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And I think that's what they wanted to achieve, was that I guess the shock of that for audiences to kind of see Diana Dors in her role. A lot of people didn't want Diana Dors to get the part. They thought it was a strange choice of casting. But Jelly Thompson worked with her previously. They'd established a good working relationship, and he wanted her for this role. Joan Henry, who wrote the screenplay, it was based on her novel. She'd spent time in prison herself. She's a really interesting character herself. And she and Diana Dors and J. Lee Thompson, they build this, fascinating character and fascinating way of telling this story. It's, really powerful. It's very understated, but it's incredibly powerful. A powerful storytelling. It got people thinking. It got, the case debated in Parliament, and there were some changes made to the laws, and which kind of set the scene for later changes further down the line and the death penalty ending. So it did what they wanted. It started that conversation.
Going back a little bit to sort of your own journey towards Diana Dors and your own journey to sort of writing a book about her. What's your history in terms of, you said you were studying film, you say?
I have studied film, yeah, just for pleasure, not for kind of, I'm not a film academic, I'm not a film scholar, I'm a film fan. So I've always had an interest in cinema from a young age, and always been fascinated by learning more about, the cinema that I was watching. My route into writing is a really random one, and it's not, I guess, your usual route in, like I say, I'm not an academic, I haven't gone down that route, although I have studied film and kind of, studied the basics of kind of film studies at night school. I didn't come in that way. I'm not a trained journalist, I'm not a trained writer in that sense. Getting to this point was a bit of a kind of strange place to be at this age. I didn't start writing about film until I was in my early 40s, even though I'd been writing for myself and kind of doing bits of kind of writing around film before that in my early 20s. I did have a go at trying to kind of get there and kind of build something where I could kind of get someone to pay me to talk about films. It never worked out, when I first tried, and but I tried again in my early 40s, and it kind of worked out this time. I'm in no way a trained writer, a trained journalist. I've not got the background that most people, I guess, who get into that. Yeah.
There's a constant theme on this podcast, if you've listened to some of the earlier episodes, is that more or less everybody seems to have come via a different route. We're all fueled by the petrol of our love of film, but the cars we're driving are all different.
Yeah.
God, I didn't know where that metaphor was going. So, it went over a cattle grid or two just to continue it. Okay, what makes you, when you're in your 40s, go, you know what, I'm going to start writing about this? What's the? Is there an inciting incident, or is it just you want a place to put your passion?
I think it was maybe more of the latter, but a little bit the former as well. So I when I left university, I wanted to be a journalist, and I couldn't afford to go and do a postgraduate qualification in journalism. I didn't have the money and the funds to access the funds to do it. So I took on a traineeship in features writing for a features agency, and had an awful experience of kind of doing that. And it was, not a great experience and not a great introduction to trying to make a career out of writing. But I always knew I was a features writer. I'm not a news reporter. I'm not a news journalist. I always knew it was longer form writing. I wanted to tell stories about fascinating people. control, or I wanted to kind of have the space to kind of create these stories and get them out there. And I did spend a year trying to make that work in terms of the features journalism. Essentially, it was a glorified sales job, getting stories, selling them to magazines, and then you can do some writing, but it seemed to be an afterthought. But yeah, so I really struggled with that environment. It didn't suit me at all, and I left that behind. It was not for me, and that all of the routes seemed to be closed off because I didn't have the qualifications, didn't have the connections, I didn't have any of the stuff. I'm just some working class girl from Leeds. I'm not in that world. And it seemed closed off to me. So I left thoughts of journalism behind, did a bit of kind of press and publicity work, press officers, that kind of thing. Again, didn't really get a kind of foot in the door, and decided, to start temping while I decided what I wanted to do with my life, and got a temping job in my local hospital. And 20 years later, I'm still work in the NHS in my day job, and I'm incredibly proud of my NHS career. I have a real love for what I do in my day job, and the impact that it has and the positive impact I can make through that work. But, I always felt I wanted to write. I always knew I was a good writer. I always knew I had a talent for writing. I just wasn't able to do anything with that, career-wise. I had a family. I had my daughter. I'm in my 30s, and kind of my time was spent, doing the day job, being stressed out and tired all the time. Once she got a little bit older, I felt, I was starting to feel I had time for myself and to kind of think about what I wanted to do. I felt there was something missing that I needed, just for my own self-worth and kind of confidence. My daughter had a condition called selective mutism, which is an anxiety-related disorder, which means that she wasn't able to talk to people outside of the immediate family. I started documenting our journey as a family through that, and I started a blog, and it was a really helpful thing for me to do, to kind of get my feelings out there, kind of start writing them down and sharing that with other people, because if we were going through it, other people were too. It's kind of, I couldn't find the information we needed. I knew that other people would be in the same boat, and I started a regular blog talking about her progress with selective mutism and how we kind of got there as a family in terms of turning that around for her. And I just kept writing. She started talking, and she started to make real progress with that. My blog started to turn into kind of a wider subject area, other things. I just kept writing every month. I made sure I wrote a blog post, and I just kept going with it. And then one day I just kind of thought, well, I enjoy writing and I want to do more with it. I was 41. I just got back from a trip to Australia with my daughter, and I'd seen how brave and wonderful she'd been, kind of taking what for her were really, difficult steps in terms of kind of her confidence and her social, kind of social skills. And I thought, if she can do that, I can do that too. When I get back, I'm going to see what I can do with this. So when I got back, I contacted a website that ran in Leeds, kind of looking at culture. I knew that's kind of the area I wanted to write on. I wanted to write on culture, film, TV, whatever it was. It was just something around that space. So I contacted the editor and said, are you looking for writers? And he said, oh, I know you write that blog about your daughter. Yeah, we'd love you to have you as a writer. And the next thing I know, I'm writing for them and writing, regular pieces on, theatre reviews, film reviews, interviews. I found I really love interviewing people. So I did a lot of that. I did a lot of kind of interviews with celebrities and, anyone who had anything new coming out in the area, they wanted to promote it. So I did a lot of interviewing, really kind of built up my writing skills and kind of, just did it. That was the only way I could kind of build that skill set, was to just get on and do it. And kind of progressed from there. And maybe not even a year later, I don't think, I had my first piece published in a film magazine. Again, I responded to a tweet, and that's how I kind of got that gig. It kind of just snowballed from there. And it was only less than 2 years between starting, making that initial connection and asking, do you want writers, to me, signing the book deal to write the Diana Dors book. So it was a very quick turnaround. I was very surprised. I wasn't expecting to be writing a book at any point, never mind, just kind of a, year or so into starting writing again. So it was a bit of a whirlwind journey, but obviously I was doing something right.
I think that's an important lesson, because I think from the outside, the world of film writing, the world of criticism, the world of journalism can seem very, very closed. But I think some of those invisible walls just aren't there. I think a lot of it is internalized. I think a lot, I have a similar background to you. Started relatively late. and it was really quick because ultimately, if you're good at it, people kind of want it. And
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I'm a good writer. I'm reliable.
exactly. Respect deadlines, respect word count.
Absolutely. I'm always on word count. I'm always on time. And I write a good pitch. I can picture a good, idea to someone. But because I have the life experience, I think it brings something different to it, and maybe a calmness and a kind of, I'm not a full-time writer either. I have that opportunity to take my time and not go for every opportunity that comes along. I go for the right opportunities for me, and as a writer I think about what I can bring to it. Well, what can I do, in that space? I'm not trying to write reviews of Marvel films and kind of, do all the stuff that everybody else is trying to do. I wanted to do something different, and I think, I'm lucky. Sometimes I think I'm lucky because I have a day job and a life outside of writing, that I can take my time and make sure, this is something that I can bring value to when I do pitch something or kind of, write something. Other times I think it's a bit of a kind of millstone around my neck because I'm not able to take opportunities. I can't, just drop everything and, suddenly go to London and, go on an internship or do any, a lot of the opportunities are closed off to me because I am older and I have responsibilities. But equally, the swings and roundabouts with all that, I think. But yeah, I guess I feel different sometimes to the people that I'm competing with, but it doesn't feel like a competition because I think I'm doing something quite different. So actually, I leave other people to do what they do and what they do really well, and I just kind of focus on the things that I think I know about, that I can bring some interesting kind of angle to, or kind of an interesting way of thinking about things. And yeah, it seems to have worked for me, so far. Built some great connections with people, and it's been a lovely experience to be able to kind of get my words out there. It's been lovely.
I like what you said as well about it's not really a competition. I think that's another moment that for me was a sort of Damascus-like moment where I just thought, no, it's, I'm not competing with people because, there's enough out there if you know where to go. And as you say, you're presenting, everyone's presenting something a little bit different. So, it's never like for like. And I try not to be, some people could be a little bit possessive with, say, email addresses of editors and things. And someone told me, well, actually, I'll tell you who told me. It was Kaleem Aftab told me on, who was on the podcast. He told me, you've got to make a decision. Either you're going to be generous and you're going to give, help people out, and it'll come round to you. The karma will come round, or you're going to be territorial and it might work, it might not, but you're not going to be as happy, And wise words from Kaleem.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, I'm definitely the former. I'm very generous with my contacts and kind of helping other people as well. I've been given the opportunity to climb a ladder, even if it's just a few rungs of it. And I'm not going to take the ladder up with me. I'm going to keep it down there for other people to follow. I want other people to feel inspired. If I can do it and do it around a day job and childcare and, all the other stuff that comes with life, other people can do it too. And I don't want people to feel it's closed off to them. Like I did feel it was when I tried in my 20s to kind of do this. It felt so closed off. I felt so lonely in the kind of the world of trying to make an impact. And it was that thing of people wouldn't help me. I couldn't access any information, and I couldn't get there, and it's kind of, I don't want that to be the experience for other people. If I can do something, even if it's just saying, oh, here's an email address of someone, or have a look at this person on Twitter, they're doing some some stuff, then I want to do that. I want to help other people to think that they can feel empowered to do something too.
By the way, you said at the very earlier on, a little bit, an answer back, I think you said you really enjoyed interviewing people.
Yeah.
What's your secret?
Well, I think, again, it's life experience. It's about being able to have a good conversation with someone and have an empathetic conversation. I think in my day job, I work with people. I manage a lot of people, and I do recruitment, and I do lots of stuff related to that and people's personal development and career development, that kind of thing. I've done career coaching and all sorts of that aspect of things and that aspect of life, I think, and having some life experience makes me a good interviewer. I found it's a skill that it works in that environment. It equally works when talking to someone about their latest film or music or whatever it is. And I've met some fascinating people, and I've heard some fascinating stories that way. And yeah, just kind of spotting the kind of the things that make it an interesting journey, or I do enjoy it. I know a lot of people don't enjoy interviewing. I understand that. But for me, I just love hearing people talking about, how they got into, like this conversation we're having, sharing those stories about, well, how did you get into this? And, you find there's some lovely stuff that people can relate to that kind of comes out of that. And yeah, I do enjoy doing that. I don't enjoy, typing it up necessarily and kind of, hearing myself back on the dictaphone. Yeah.
You start doing some writing for this, for the website, and you're pitching to magazines and you're getting published, and you pitch this as a book to the publisher?
No, again, it came from a tweet. So I saw a tweet from someone saying such and such publishers is looking for authors, and one of the ideas they were looking for an author for was I think it was the history of Shepperton Studios, and I thought, oh, that's just down my street, that in terms of my interest in British cinema. And I thought, oh, I'll have a look into that. And I thought, oh, I'll email and then I'll contact them. Just ran, just like thought, oh yeah, why not? I don't know where I got this confidence from, by the way, to do this kind of stuff. So yeah, it felt, I felt at that time, I just thought, yeah, why not? I could do that. So I emailed and had a bit of a conversation with the person who put the tweet out there. That book wasn't necessarily one that I could write, but we had a talk about some other ideas. And they said, oh yeah, we're looking for biographies. And one of the ones they were looking for someone to write was on Diana Dors. And I thought, wow, the timing of that was perfect, because I remember having a conversation with someone not that long before. We were talking about Diana Dors, and I was saying I would love to read a really good biography of her, one that kind of cuts through all the usual stuff, the usual focus, which I'm sure we'll get onto in terms of, her and her career. One written by a woman, not by a middle-aged man. I really want to I'd love to read that book, but I can't find one. And then so the opportunity came up for me to write it. I thought, well, I've got to write this book because it's the book I want to read. And I'm sure other people would want to read it too. A different perspective, something, a story that needs to be told, and told for a modern audience, but, obviously respecting, the love that people have, for Diana Dors, comes from many places. But I wanted to kind of tell her story anew with a different perspective. And I think, yeah, it was obviously meant to be, because that was the book I wanted to read, so therefore I had to write it. So yeah, I said I'll give you a proposal on that one. So I wrote a proposal, sent it to the publishers, and they came back and accepted it. And yeah, the rest is history.
Diana Dors has this sort of beginning to her sort of career. First of all, she has such an unfortunate name. Her real name is what is it again? It's Diana
Fluck. As he said, if you see that name up in lights and one of the bulbs goes, you're in trouble. So yeah, obviously she changed her name quite early on. So she started acting at a very young age. She went to live in London at the age of 14 to start acting training. And yeah, it soon became apparent she would need to change her name as she started to kind of make inroads with it. And yeah, she did that pretty early on. And Dors was her grandmother's maiden name. And obviously it works. The double D works perfectly. And yeah, she made the right choice there, I think.
I mean, that thing about being so young as well, and being because she starts acting at 14, 15, as you say, but then she's sort of like, she's being considered for sort of fairly sexualized roles really quite early on in her career, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think even her first screen role, she was playing older than she was. So she's 15 when she had her first screen role. A very small part, but yeah, she was 15 and playing older and playing a little bit of a kind of cheeky part as well. It's quite an interesting little performance.
What was the name of the film?
The Shop at Sly Corner is her first role, and she always, a lot early on, she has these small roles in these films. The kind of the two a penny kind of British film studio films that were kind of very much of the time. But she always gives such a lovely performance. It's that knack for, she had such great screen presence. She knew the camera. She worked with the camera really well from a young age. She understood what the camera wanted, and she was able to provide that. She really had a lot of personality that kind of came through even with those early roles. She always, she may well have had a small amount of screen time, but she always made the most of it. And she was making films, film after film early on as a teenager. I think she was told to say she was older than she was, but she was from a young age performing on screen regularly.
And then she gets taken on by the Rank organization, which is one of those sort of, well, it's probably the most important thing going in the British film industry at this point, right?
Absolutely. So she joins she signs a contract with the Rank Charm School, as it was known, which essentially was a bit of a production line for young talent. So J. Arthur Rank had set this up to kind of, I guess, try and mimic the success of Hollywood, the Hollywood studio system. But it was a little bit of a production line of young stars coming in, learning the basics, learning the ropes, and kind of a bit of deportment and a bit of kind of screen acting and a bit of this and a bit of that in a kind of drafty church hall, in North London. And it didn't exactly have the glamour of Hollywood, which I think she was very disappointed about. But they were worked hard. There was this kind of group of contract stars who were always working. You always see them in the same films, over and over again. She was one of them, and she knew how to play the system. She knew that she would need to do the publicity stuff that went along with it. It was all part of it, part of the kind of the process, and she kind of understood, I think, from an early age that went with it. She was always prepared to kind of turn up and kind of cut a ribbon, or kind of have a photo taken at a fete or whatever it was. She was always there, and she always understood the importance of it. She wasn't overly happy about it, and she wasn't overly happy about the parts that she was playing. She was typecast from a young age as kind of the good time girl or the femme fatale type, but not in an interesting way, not in a Hollywood sense. It was more, it wasn't quite where she saw herself. She always had massive confidence in her ability to be a star, and she was a little bit disappointed, I think, in some of the roles that she was put forward for during that time. There were many other people obviously went through the Rank Charm School doors as well at the same time, and you can see how some of them made it and some of them didn't. I think she was destined to make it, simply because of the way she embraced it, as well as kind of her performance, that she embraced the system and kind of went with it, really.
I mean, that's part of the thing that I loved about the book, aside from, entwined with the story of her life, is this sort of history of British film at this moment that she runs very much parallel to. And it feels like she's kind of a little bit slipping through the cracks of sort of movements, you know what I mean? The sort of the angry young men sort of situation is coming up, and it's de-glamorizing the screen just as she's starting to want to play the sort of British Marilyn Monroe character. And there's also a sense that is there a sense that looking to America that both she and the British film industry, it seems to be doing, is in some ways sort of damages her career?
Yeah, I think so. I think she didn't have many options. This is the thing. She wanted to go to Hollywood, and she did try to go to Hollywood, and it didn't work out for her. She saw her future elsewhere. She didn't see her future in the British film industry as it was, because it just simply wasn't giving her the opportunities to take on those glamorous leading roles and kind of leave behind the kind of what's seen by some of the drabness of British cinema at the time. I think a lot of people kind of, I can see what people mean when they talk about British cinema at that time being kind of, schmaltzy or drab or whatever it is. But there's a real humour to it, there's a real warmth to it. There's lots of lovely little films that kind of came out during that time that people kind of, miss, because they're just, there was so much happening. So it was obviously, activity was huge at the time in terms of, in the British sense of, filmmaking. But there was a lot of kind of production line stuff. But I think people often miss some of the little gems that kind of came out of that system. But it was never going to sustain itself, and a lot of talent left because there wasn't the roles for them. Talked about J. Lee Thompson, the director. He directed a lot of the films and studio films around that time, and he went to America. He left it behind because he just couldn't get the break even after Yield to the Night. It just wasn't going to be there. He went to Hollywood, and a lot of stars did. Diana Dors, as I say, tried to go to Hollywood. Notoriously didn't work out for her for various reasons, mainly Dennis Hamilton, her first husband, and his behaviours. it just didn't work out for her, and she was gutted. She really struggled, I think, to kind of get her head around the fact that just didn't happen for her, and she came back to Britain and had to try again.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about her sort of private. I was hesitating really to use the phrase private life, because it seems to have been so much part of her story publicly as well. Basically, her several husbands and her love affairs and everything, which then became sort of tabloid fodder. Again, it's that thing of you've read, the tabloid version, and then you read the sort of reality, the stuff that you've uncovered, and the more as you said, more empathetic vision, and it's kind of heartbreaking, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This was a real journey that I went on when I was researching and reading and kind of uncovering, as I was writing the book. It was there was real heartbreaking moments in the journey. It was a real journey for her, her life journey and her career journey kind of intertwined all through the writing of the book. And yeah, you can see she made some bad decisions, she's not, I think she would freely admit that she made those bad decisions. It wasn't all, kind of in the stars, or, her fate was kind of in the hands of other people. She did make some maybe some bad life choices, one of the main ones being the choice of first husband, Dennis Hamilton, who took control of her career and, not for the better. But then also, she understood, from a young age, as we've already said, she understood the importance of publicity. She understood the importance of the other stuff that goes along with becoming a star and being in the public eye. And, Dennis Hamilton was a Svengali type. He self-styled Svengali. He wanted to take control of her career and kind of take her in a direction that she wasn't necessarily comfortable with. And he certainly made her, infamous in some ways. There were all sorts of, kind of incidents and kind of situations that he got her into. But also, she understood the value of staying in the public eye. And, she was the first person to sell her story to a Sunday tabloid. So she sold her story to the News of the World in 1960. It was serialised over several weeks. She knew the value of putting herself out there, information and the press, and how to kind of play that game. She was the first person to really do that and embrace it and kind of make use of it, from both ways. She knew what the press wanted, and often she knew she had to kind of give that kind of information away. Often it was for money. She was always struggling. She was the one who went out and earned. All three of her husbands were, not exactly able to support her. She was always the one going out and working, and that was something that really came across when writing the book, was that that work ethic. She was a grafter. She had to keep working. When things weren't working out, she would go and do cabaret, or she'd go and do, at one stage, the working man's club circuit, just to keep working, to keep the money coming in, keep the bills paid, and lived a lifestyle she'd become accustomed to, or her husband's had become accustomed to, and she just kept going. The kind of that thing of dusting yourself down, picking yourself back up again, and going again. The number of times she had to do that was quite astounding. I hadn't been aware of just how much she'd had to do that through her career, particularly into the 60s, kind of the 70s. And then, just kind of just trying things and doing things, just taking those chances and risks, and that maybe other actors wouldn't do. And I think she's all her career and the kind of the strength of her career and the depth of her career reflect that. I should know how many films she's appeared in. I don't. It's hundreds. But she just kept working. She kept going, and even when things looked like they were never going to turn around, she would have a chink of light where something would happen, and it would she did a lot of stage work, and she got some great notices for her stage work, kind of into the 70s, for example, and kind of she just kind of embraced every opportunity that came her way. Sometimes she took the wrong opportunity, and then her career would kind of go on a different path potentially. You do wonder what could have been if she'd maybe made different decisions. But her private life and her career are intertwined at all stages, and there was no getting away from that when writing the book. I had to take the journey as one, in a way. I couldn't separate the two things out, because they completely influenced each other. And, that part of her life had to be part of the book, the personal life, the stuff that people are focused on in terms of the kind of some of the more sordid elements of her personal life. particularly early on with Dennis Hamilton. You know, that had to be there. It had to be there in the book. But I wanted to present it as part of a wider journey and also a wider kind of social history of the time as well, you know. And she lived through, as you alluded to, she lived through some of the most fascinating periods in British social history of the 20th century, and also, you know, the film history as well. This, you know, she lived through all that. You know, she navigated her acting journey and her personal journey through all that, and it was important to kind of give that context, I think, as well, to give that information to the reader, and, you know, let people make their own conclusions about, you know, her and her career through that lens, I think.
It seems like a really dangerous. It seems like there was an element of danger around her, and, you know, not of her doing, but there were elements of, like, there's bits where I think it's her husband burns down the house, or somebody burns down a house because they were setting off fireworks and everyone was drunk. And as you say, there's this connection to a sort of maybe a shadier side of the late the 50s and 60s, where you have, I think you referred to the Profumo affair and the Christine Keeler and that sort of stuff, and that's all sort of happening around about the same time, right?
Yeah, no, it is. And yeah, she kind of, like you say, her journey kind of interacts with and kind of intersects with lots of different elements that, you know, kind of come to the fore in later years, in terms of, yeah, that kind of political and social changing landscape, I think, you know, particularly into the 60s and beyond. You know, she seemed to be on the periphery of all of these things. There were connections there, you know. If I'd had more opportunity to kind of delve into that, you know, it would have been interesting to kind of tease that out a little bit more. But yeah, she was mixed in slightly dodgy circles, you know, particularly through her husband, through Dennis Hamilton and his dodgy mates, and you know she kind of she was kind of, you know, on the periphery of a lot of interesting situations and interesting characters.
There's like sex parties going on, and there's you know, I mean, it's that whole stuff. I mean, I think you have absolutely the right sort of weight to it, that you don't sort of you know, you don't go into it too much, you don't give it too much weight, but at the same time, wow, what a weird world to live in.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. As I say, I had to cover that stuff. You know, it was part of her and her journey. And yeah, you know, the six parties were a big part of that. They were well known in certain circles, her and her husband, for the parties that they threw. With, you know, two-way mirrors and, you know, kind of staging areas, and encouraging men and women to kind of go off and perform, apparently unaware that they were being watched, and that kind of thing. It was very clear that she was never involved herself. No one ever, from my reading and speaking to people, she was never involved herself, but she obviously knew about it. In her, she wrote a lot herself, and I think that's one thing I would mention, is that she was a great writer herself. She wrote a lot of books during that time. You know, she knew the power of kind of getting her, you know, stuff out there and her opinions out there. She wrote her first autobiography in 1960. You know, she was still very young. She wrote numerous books through the 60s and 70s and into the 80s, including a second autobiography as well in 1980, I think it came out. And she was a very sharp and very witty woman, and that really comes across in the way that she writes and the way that she kind of presents herself in that light. And she's very clever to kind of, you know, she tells the story of this stuff happening around her, not necessarily, you know, how she was involved, but yeah, from talking to people, that's kind of true. You know, she was handing out the vol au vents while people were enjoying themselves. You know, she was making sure the glasses were topped up, didn't drink herself. She always had kept a clear head, and yeah, very useful, I think, for when it came to kind of later years, when she used to recount, you know, her opinions and her experiences of other people. There's some wonderful anecdotes in her own writing about certain individuals, and I think, you know, you can only do that if you're a clever, resourceful, you know, kind of woman who knows the value of keeping quiet and, you know, just making notes, I think.
Yeah, just sticking to the shandy while everybody's on the Dom Perignon.
Absolutely.
I really, really hope that those autobiographies fully exploited the pun potential of her surname?
Oh, there's loads. Yes, so the first one's called Swindon-born. So
There you go. There you go.
If so much she peaked too early, I think, in terms
the
of
first
naming.
one should have been called the Early Doors, surely.
A lot of the books that she wrote were a little bit of a pun. There was Behind Closed Doors as well, in the late 70s. I'd say Swinging Doors, which was her first autobiography. She also she wrote a lot of articles as well, newspaper articles, magazine articles, and that kind of thing. One of my favourite books of hers is called The A to Z of Men, which came out in the early 80s.
Wow.
And that's an eye-opener, I'll tell you.
In what sense? In what sense did I open?
Just some of the she's just very forthright. She was given a brief, and she fulfilled it in terms of what that book needed to be. As I say, she played on her own image. She knew the image that people were wanting to see, and she did embrace that. And kind of, if that meant writing a book called The A to Z of Men, and the cover with picture of her. I think that's the one where she's there sat in a chair with a parrot on her shoulder. I can't remember off the top of my head. I don't have it in front of me.
Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you have a parrot on your shoulder?
There was an image of her that kind of that the public expected, and I think she delivered that, and she had fun along the way as well. You can see that she had fun doing these things, and kind of that always comes across, particularly into the late 70s, early 80s when she's on TV a lot. You can see she's cheeky, she's funny, she's enjoying herself, kind of when she's kind of having those conversations with Russell Harty or whoever on the sofa, and the fun aspect of her comes across. And from talking to people when doing the book, and also since, when people have come forward and said, "Oh, I've seen your book," or "I heard you writing a book and I knew her," or "My mum knew her," or she comes across as this wonderful life and soul of the party, a really fun person to be around, very warm, very witty, very kind of embracing of people. And a lot of people have come to me and said, I met her once and she was lovely to me, and she did this, she did that. And it's lovely to know that my feeling for her as I was writing the book is kind of played out in other people's experiences of her, because I didn't get the chance to speak to her. Obviously, she died very young. She died age 52 in 1984, and she obviously touched a lot of people's lives and kind of left a real indelible mark on them, in terms of, she sounded like such a lovely person to be around. I would have loved to have gone for a drink with her, spent time listening to her stories. I bet she would be great fun. Yeah,
she would have got you drunk and got you to do terrible things, and then written an autobiography about it with punning on her name again. You said that's something that's really interesting about her story, is that on one level, as you were saying about the Cabaret, there's a brilliant moment in your book where you describe her basically going, I'm an actress, how do I do cabaret? And sort of having to work out an act, because who has a cabaret act up their sleeve? And then there's also this sense that, as you said as well earlier, that she made some bad decisions. Was there ever a point when you were writing the book where you could sort of pinpoint a bit and say, damn it, if she'd gone this way and not that way, her career would have been much different?
Yeah, I think both from a kind of career point of view, I think that the time you're talking about there with the Cabaret is a good example. I can't remember the roles, but she was offered theatre and she was offered cabaret. She went down the cabaret route with more money in it. She was swayed by her husband, I think, into making that decision, because more money means let's go down and let's do that. And I think she was pushed down that route. I think if she'd maybe taken a more considered view, taken some theatre, or there might not have been the money in it, the prestige from a kind of publicity point of view, but from a critical point of view, she could act. She got good notices, she got good reviews, when she took to the stage, for example, or in some of her other films where she was able to give more of a kind of understated performance, later on in her career. She could obviously act, and I think she wasn't able to really exploit that because she was swayed by I guess the pressure from other people sometimes, the pressure to keep going, not. And she did take risks, but sometimes it was easier to go down the more lucrative route with the Cabaret, for example. I think on a personal point of view, I won't spoil it for people because I want people to read the book, but there's one love affair early on, which I think I just wish she'd been able to build a relationship with that person. I think her career and her personal life would have taken a very different turn, and she wouldn't necessarily have had the ups and downs and the real heartbreak of those relationships, those personal relationships that she went on to kind of, just, a victim of kind of, other people's decisions in terms of her personal life. If she'd gone, I just wish she'd followed her heart a little bit earlier on, and I think things would have been very different, both on a career and a personal point of view.
I was also thinking about this as I was reading it. I was trying to think of sort of like equivalent actresses of that era who went from Britain, and I can think of ones from earlier. Maybe Joan Collins would be one from around about the same time.
Yeah, she knew Joan Collins as well, Diana Dors. Her agent at one stage was Diana Dors' agent at one stage was Joan and Jackie Collins' dad. I'm sure he was her agent at one point. So yeah, she knew Joan Collins. Yeah, I think it's a good example. A little bit later on, I think, than Diana Dors. I think with Joan Collins. But yeah, again, she did go. She made the leap, didn't she, from the kind of the British film studio system to Hollywood. There's very few examples, I think, of any, personally that I can think of who tried it and succeeded.
I mean, you can think of them earlier. There's sort of like people like Vivian Leigh, and there are people, Claire Trevor, sort of. I can think of sort of the black and white movies from a little bit 5-10 years earlier, perhaps. I just keep thinking of Diana Dors as almost this transitional figure who's just not quite. She's just one. She's either a little bit too far ahead or she's a little bit too far behind to really catch the wave.
Yeah
Because even in terms of like the attitudes to sex that we were talking about earlier, she ends up doing she doesn't even do confessions films. She does the sort of cheap knockoff of the confessions films. And it's that, what were they called? Adventures of a Private Eye.
Yeah, Adventures of a Taxi Driver, it was the Adventures of series. Like any actor of that time, she had no choice. Everybody was having to do those films in the 70s because there was nothing else to do. She had to ride that wave because what else would she be doing? There were no other roles. She would get script after script, which was essentially the same thing. And the choice just wasn't there in Britain. The 70s cinema in Britain was awful. From that point of view. Yes, there was some, there was some interesting work being created, but generally, you didn't have much to choose from, either as a cinema goer or as an actor. You had to kind of go with it was sitcom spin-offs. It was...
And they were always going to Spain.
Absolutely.
It was always like, are you being served in Spain? Or, on the buses in Spain?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It was in a dire situation. There was horror. Horror was obviously had its critical acclaim, and was an industry in itself in Britain of that period. And she did horror films as well. She had a career. She embraced that side of things too. She just kept doing what she could do. She just kept going. But yeah, you're right. Some of the film choices of that period really actually very depressing in terms of there's not much you can kind of glean from that and her performances in terms of her as a screen star. But on the other hand, and at the same time, running parallel to that, she started to do television work. She'd done a little bit in the 60s and elements earlier on. But in the 70s, she started doing some really interesting work, on the small screen. And I always wonder if she'd lived longer and hadn't died at such an early age, what she would have gone on to do. Where would her career have taken her? I think she was starting to gain the respect as an actor, later on, because once she was able to embrace those character roles and take on those more interesting roles in more interesting work, she was able to kind of show and demonstrate her acting skills and not having to rely on this image that was kind of created around her. When she was able to shed that, she did some great. So she did some comedy. She did Queenie's Castle, which is a wonderful, wonderful sitcom from 1970. She did, episodes of Minder. She did all sorts of things through the 70s, which people do remember and loved her performances in. She could have gone on, I think, to have a wonderful small screen career in the UK. You think she could have... I envisaged her doing like a Linda LaPant drama in the mid-90s, or something like that, and being this wonderful character actor, which I think she was showing the signs of kind of wanting to go on that journey, actually, as an actor. I think she was starting to really kind of see her kind of future in that space, because, again, film, wasn't necessarily this option for her necessarily. I think she could have gone on to do some wonderful, wonderful things. had she lived longer.
And she was a good, as well as being a good talk show guest, there was a couple of attempts for her to be a talk show host, sort of like a proto-Oprah.
Yeah, she did a couple of stints. One which I've not seen, that I don't think there's any footage still exists of it, was a pilot for a program called Pause for Doors, which was a pet chat show.
Yes. Why? Why isn't that amazingly famous?
Yeah, unfortunately, it was just the one pilot episode, I think. But it was her talking to stars about their pets. It wasn't her talking to pets, which would have been a very different prospect. So that would have been hilarious.
But who did she have on? I remember.
It was Zsa Zsa Gabor was one of the guests. But yeah, she wanted to go into that field. She saw herself in that sphere. You know, she saw herself as a good host, and she's a great conversationalist, and you know,
raconteur. Yeah,
absolutely. You can see that as a guest, and I think she did. There is still some kind of footage of some of the couple of other forays she did into kind of presenting her own chat shows. Neither of which kind of came to anything really. But you can see when her stint on TVAM in the early 80s, when she's doing her diet section, she's great. She's great on live TV. She's great interacting with the public as well in that. I mean, I would ask anyone to seek that out on online, just as a demonstration of how wonderful she was. You know, kind of in that sphere. Again, the chat show guest, you know, kind of part of her career was a real kind of it's lovely. And she did comedy, you know, she was very funny. The Two Ronnies sketch, The One That Turned, that she appeared in, was wonderful. She had a real comic timing, and yeah, she could have gone down that road too. You know, she knew how to take the mickey out of herself, and I think, you know, you can see that on screen when she's performing. She loved it.
The Worm Who Turned was a Two Ronnies sketch which alerted me to the dangers of feminism.
Yes. Oh, honestly, you need people need to have a look at that again. It's wonderful. She was great in it.
And again, you know, that's I think the proof of how good your book is that as you get to the end of the book, I felt really sad. I was really because I was sort of thinking, okay, I remember her, but then she disappeared. What happened? And of course, she died very young. She was diagnosed with cancer, and and it was very quick in the end, I think. And it's so there's a real sense of this person hadn't finished. She had an ongoing career, and there was another chapter to be written, perhaps.
Absolutely. You know, 52 is no age, is it, no. For your life to end. And it was such a tragedy, and she had so much more to give, both as an actor, but also as, you know, as a mother. You know, she left behind a young son. She had her two older sons were in America. You know, she had so much more to give, and I think it was a real loss. I think people at the time really felt that loss. I think the way that the tabloid aspect and the tabloid interest in her, I think it's really interesting. You know, that was there at the time, so you see that through her career, that kind of tabloidy kind of attention. When she died, again, there was all that kind of stuff around her, and particularly obviously her third husband, Alan Lake, who she loved him. You can see how much they loved each other. It was a good, strong, loving relationship, that third marriage. He had his issues, and, you know, he again came to his story is a tragic one too. Again, I won't go into what happened, but, you know, there was a lot of tabloid speculation at the time about it. And, you know, you're thinking, just stop, you know, just leave the family alone. Again, when I was writing the book, and when obviously people were hearing that the book was coming out, I did have people contact me from newspapers, one in the Goss, wanting to know, have you got any news? What's, you know, any kind of new gossip? You know, what's the new kind of stuff you've got in there? All the kind of intrigue around her personal life again was coming to the fore, in terms of people wanted. They weren't interested in necessarily covering it if there wasn't anything salacious in there, and anything new, any new dirt. And I think there's always going to be that focus on her. That's always going to be there. I tried to wade through it. I tried to kind of pull it all apart and build it back up again. You know, put the pieces of the jigsaw together. That stuff is still there, you know, as part of her and her journey. And it's a shame that always seems to be the focus. Even now, you know, 40 years on from when she died nearly, you know, people still have that kind of interest in her, the salacious aspects of her life, rather than looking at her as an individual, as a woman navigating, you know, the kind of the change of the 20th century, and as a screen star. You know, it's such a shame that will always be there. Hopefully, but with the book, I've managed to add another layer of interest another layer of kind of context so that people can kind of view her story anew, or maybe revisit it and think, oh, actually, yeah, I know something. I know that a little bit differently now. I understand that a little bit more. If I can do that and get people to kind of think about her in a little bit of a different way, then I've kind of achieved what I want to achieve, I think.
Yeah, and let's remind people that if they want to go and find some Diana Dors sort of film performances away from the sort of, to remind everybody of why she was great talented actress. The Long Haul was one you mentioned. Tread Softly Stranger was another.
Yeah, so Tread Softly Stranger and The Long Haul are of a type, I would say, of British film of the 50s, and are really worth seeking out. The Weak and the Wicked is another one she did with J. Lee Thompson, who directed Yield to the Night. It's a really interesting film. It's part of more of an ensemble cast, but she gives a fantastic performance in that as well. I have a real soft spot for some of her mid-50s work. So Value for Money, which is another film from 1955, which is a kind of a frothy, I guess you call it a rom-com in today's context. Really lovely little film. There's lots of films like that where she gives a lovely performance in what's a very sweet, understated film. You could go down the road watching Passport to Shame. It's a fantastic film and a real example of something very different in British cinema. That's an Alvin Rakoff film, and she's really fascinating in that. It's a really interesting film, worth seeking out. I think it's been revisited a lot, I think, through film critics and film academics in recent years. It's really worth seeing. Yeah, there's so many films from that period where she is giving peak Diana Dors. She kind of... Dance Hall is another one from 1950, a very early performance from her. She, again, part of an ensemble cast, but a great film. But I think another one to seek out would be West 11, which is a 1963 film, which is kind of British New Wave-esque. And that's directed by Michael Winner. And it's a really interesting film, actually, and really worth kind of seeking out as a kind of... the British New Wave in itself is a fascinating period in British cinema. It's interesting to see her experience of it through that film, and the part she plays. It's the first of where she's older now. She's slightly older. She's playing a slightly different character, a bit more nuance, a bit more to that character, but still with the glamour of Diana Dors and what you would expect from her. But it's really interesting, understated performance. Deep End as well. It's a great film. There's so many I could I'd be here all day, honestly, recommending Diana Dors films, because there's so many of them as well. This is the thing. She was prolific. She really, really was. She worked all the way through the 50s, 60s and 70s, and there's something for everyone, I think, from each of those decades.
Before we leave it, I've got one final question for you, which is, could you recommend a film book for our listeners?
Yeah, so I think the one that I would recommend would be Matthew Sweet's Shepperton Babylon, which is his book about the history of the British film industry and the British studio system. It's a fascinating read, it's an entertaining read, but it's a really accessible read, and it was a real inspiration for me, actually, with my film writing. It's books like that and people who talk about film in an accessible way and make people interested and kind of bring out those interesting stories, stories of individuals. And I think that is a really good example of a book that does that. It takes individual stories from the different periods in British cinema and kind of tells those stories and gives that context around what was happening. It's a very well written, wonderfully entertaining read. So absolutely, that would be my recommendation.
Brilliant, excellent. I'm going to put that on my list and see if I can find Matthew Sweet's email address at the same time.
Yeah.
This is how we get guests.
Yeah, I don't know if it's still in print or not, but certainly it's available. In places where you can find books online.
Yeah, I've used a lot of those secondhand books things, partly to piss off Jeff Bezos, because I know, he's like, oh damn it, Bleasdale's got another secondhand book. I can't go to Mars. It's so great talking to you, Anna. I really appreciate you spending the time, and I really appreciate your book on Diana Dors. It made me absolutely look at somebody I thought I knew in a totally different way, and I've got a lot of these films now on my watch list, so I'm hopefully going to rediscover bits of British cinema as well as another side of Diana Dors.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm so glad that you enjoyed the book, and it's lovely to hear that you're going to seek out her work as well, because it is well worth it. It really, really is.
That was was my conversation with Anna Cale about her book, The Real Diana Dors, which is available everywhere just in time for Christmas. Anna's recommended book was Shepperton Babylon by Matthew Sweet. So that's gone on my list, my Christmas wish list. All that remains now really is for me to thank Elliot Atkins for the music, Ali Harwood for the artwork. I hope you're enjoying these podcasts. If you are, please remember to tell everybody you know who might be interested. And we can continue these conversations far, far, far into the future. Okay, thanks everybody for listening. And until the next time, please take care.